Welcome everyone to this webinar series exploring key skills to enhance an academic career. This is the second and final webinar in this two-part series. Today's webinar is titled Publishing Papers for Journals and Applying for International Grants. My name is Professor Marta Cohen, and I am the Vice President of Learning at the Royal College of Pathologists, and created the program for this series, and I will be moderating the webinar series. So I'm going to show you today's agenda. The first presentation is by Professor Daniel Berney, how to write a paper. Then it will be followed by Professor Miguel Reyes Mujican, how to find the right journal for my paper. Then it will be followed by Professor Sarah Copeland, applying for international grants, applying for grants in general. And then it will be a Q&A session, so please drop your questions in the Q&A, and I will be moderating the last part. So, as you know, the previous was on the 14th of October, applying for bursaries and preparing presentation for international conferences. That is being recorded, and it will be uploaded, available in the website in the webinar part. So my pleasure is today to invite Professor Dan Berney to provide a presentation of how to write a paper, and I will stop sharing so he can put his presentation. Professor Dan Berney is a consultant at Bar Health NHS Trust. He's a specialist in endocrine and gastrourinary pathology, and also professor at Queen University. He has written more than 300 papers. He's working particularly with prostate and testicular carcinomas, and he is editor-in-chief and has been the editor-in-chief of Histopathology since 2018. Thank you very much, Dan, for being available to present, and you can start. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for logging in. I'm going to talk just in general terms about how to write a paper and how to go about it. And the first thing you need to understand is who is going to read your work. Now, first of all, this is other scientists, but the readers are going to include editors and reviewers. Now, as we know, in the busy world, they're all very, very busy people, and there's a lot of competing material. So you need to find ways of grabbing and keeping your readers and reviewers' intentions. Now, a good paper is like a gripping novel. It immediately captures your interest. It tells a story, and you need to tell a story with enthusiasm and excitement. I always think of Harry Potter, which grabs everyone straight away, and it doesn't contain any unnecessary information. Every sentence reads smoothly into the next. I don't know if anyone knows Finnegan's Wake. It's a famously incomprehensible mishmash of words. And to be honest with you, sometimes I do see that in papers in histopathology. So we're looking more for Harry Potter than for James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, to be honest with you. Now, a good paper is very easy to read, but it's really difficult to write. And this is an old phrase, the law of conservation of efforts. A fixed amount of paper is required to adequately write and review a paper. So the less you put in, the more the reviewer has to put in. And the more reviewer has to put in, the less he's going to like it. So you need to make it as easy for the editor and reviewer as possible to understand the paper. Now, style and language, measured, not inflammatory. Occasionally we have these torrential attacks on other authors, or on other scientists. Overcomplicating wins no friends. Presenting something that's too complicated for me to understand. I'm afraid at my, dare I say, advanced stage of life, I tend to think it's not so much a problem with me anymore if it overcomplicates it that I can't understand it. If I can't understand it, I don't think it's going to be comprehensible to my readers. And again, the English, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it must be comprehensible. So write with a reviewer's perspective, write for them, not for you, and be respectful of a reviewer's time. Keep it simple. It may be reviewed by not someone directly in your field. And if you have to work too hard to find a message, it'll be missed. And use a writing style that makes it easy to understand. You don't have to use over complex words. These are the sort of thing that editors don't like. If it's not in scope, unoriginal, very long papers, I often have to say, but I couldn't squeeze it in. I had to use 7,000 words for this paper. You don't. Nearly everything can be told in 2,000 or 3,000 words. What other things we don't like? Incorrect filled methods, unrepresentative samples, poor or misleading stats, non-randomized interventions, and particularly for pathology, poor images, poor controls, poor presentations. There's no need for any of them. That they will turn you off. I often return to this simple paper. It's very short. The structure for DNA, written by Watson and Crick. Do read it. It's free online. Starts off, we wish to suggest the structure for the salt of deoxyribose nucleic acid, DNA. This structure has novel features which are of considerable biological interest. Huge understatement. The final words of the paper suggest it has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. Simple, short words on the most part, easily comprehensible. It's a really well worth going back and reading this paper if you ever get a chance, as I said, free online. So what are the general structure of journal articles? Well, I hope I don't have to tell you: title, abstract, keywords, references, etc. And we're going to go through each of these in turn and think how they can be improved when you're paper writing. So first of all, the title. Clear and precise. Long titles rarely work well. It's a shown fact that papers with short titles are often cited better than papers with long titles, and being an accurate reflection of the subject matter and hopefully draw you in a little. There's lots of ways to do it. You can be a questioning title. Is X associated with Y? A study into X and Y? Or statements. X is associated with Y. X is a poor prognostic factor for Y. I must say, apropos of nothing, one of my highest cited papers is, and I wasn't the lead author on it, was an X fatally induces Y. I think the word fatally drew the reviewers and the citations in, possibly unworthily, but there you go. So you can have a number of ways to phrase the paper to draw the editor, reviewers, and readers in. The abstract. So you need to include things, a concise outline of the setting of the work, what was done and what it means in the abstract. You can be misleading in an abstract, so beware. I also personally, if the abstract includes confidence intervals and things like that, that's much better. It should include, you know, a confidence interval if they're in the paper. A bit of stats in there does no harm whatsoever to draw the reader in that this is an important new work. So the abstract, I mean, often you'll be writing for a poster first. I've got a poster coming up at USCAT, and we've an abstract, and that's given me enough to think about what's going to be the papers. What are the challenges? You've never got enough words. You have to learn to précis. And the art of précis is often a good thing to do. It can be done sometimes with using abbreviations to help you out. If you've got if you've got some abbreviations in there that are explained, that's helpful. And often you can find things can be said in a more precise, cogent way. As I said, give significance values if done, and hide nothing. Do give detracting factors. Be honest. Don't hide your dirty laundry. Keep it in the abstract as well. Keywords, I mean, what it says on the tin, you have to reflect what is seen in the paper. You'd have had them useful in searching for papers associated with the subject. Body of text, obviously you've got these things to consider. And I want to take you back to Bradford Hill for these things. Brad Dolan Hill were the people who were the men in the early 50s who showed the link between smoking and DNA. And Austin Bradford Hill had a great way, and I want you to memorize this. It's the best way to introduce how the structure the paper. The introduction should be, why did you start? The materials and methods should be, what did you do? The results should be, what answer did you get? And the discussion should be, what does it mean? Now, you may think this sounds very straightforward, and it should be. When you write, you will find the discussion leaks into the results and material and methods, and the introduction will leak into other areas as well. So you need to try and keep these thoughts separate in your head to form a clarity of purpose in the paper that will avoid contamination of these different sections. This is easier said than done, I promise you. But if you can think of Bradford Hill's way of thinking about it, it's a really good way of keeping them in their silos. The introduction should set the scene, concisely give the background. Don't be too long. A lot of papers have a huge introduction and smaller other sections. That's not needed. It's often useful to end it with a statement of the hypothesis to be tested. And again, avoid rehashing all the results and discussion, because some people can't resist putting them in there. Materials and methods should contain enough information for the reader to understand what was done. How much detail is for debate? Should always include ethics. Always have your controls up front. Always have your stats up front. If it's too big, you can always put it in an online supplementary information. If you're dealing with a really big paper for Nature, some people package their whole material and methods online. That's not the way to go. Certainly for the paper, which is pathology and the Journal of Pathology, I think having a material methods there is absolutely fine. Results should be a statement of the core findings in a logical sequence, again, with no interpretation or inference. It's very easy to get excited at this point and say what it means. Just say what the results are in a neutral way. Display items, again, shouldn't replicate information in the text too much, and do emphasize important controls. Some results can again be packaged in the supporting information. I would go on to talk a little bit about tables and figures. We have a problem with figures now and good photomicroscopy. And it's important these days not to enhance your images, or if you do so, be upfront. There are a lot of image checkers out there these days who could check any manipulation. And we've had a number of journals have had this problem of people over manipulating images. So we should be able to do good photomicroscopy without manipulating images. This is more to the point in fraudulent fabrication, especially with Western blots, which are more easily done. But I don't know if anyone's heard of Elizabeth Bick, but there are lines out there and pub peer review just to check for these sort of things, and you don't want to end up in trouble. So no over manipulation, please. We should be able to manage good photomicroscopy without resorting to image manipulation. Don't make them overwhelming. Use p-values, percentage versus number. You can use both if you wish, and make it as user-friendly and understandable as you can. Again, overcomplication wins no friends. Discussion. The data should be placed in the broad context of prior publications. So this is where you explain how this enhances previous data. Don't speculate beyond them. It's very good practice to explain potential caveats and problems. Ask yourself why this might be wrong. What have I done wrong? Is it this? For instance, in some of my work, I would say this is a retrospective, not a prospective analysis. And obviously, what else needs to be done? I know it's a sort of standard practice to say further work is needed, but try and be more specific than that. And a balanced paper will consider the field in the round. Going on to the general structure of the articles, references. A list of all the sources used in the paper usually other papers, but can be books, only rarely websites. As you know, referencing is a bit of a nightmare because you have to change the style, and EndNote and other programs like that are really good at doing that. Thankfully, a lot of journals nowadays expect, including histopathology, accept any referencing and will change the formatting for you post hoc. So that's very convenient if you want to change from one journal type to another. They'll often do it for you. I'm not an over-referencer, I must confess, because I think often people flood you with references to try and impress you. I personally find that 30, 40, 50 references are often enough. For a major review, maybe 100 references, and it's a specific field you're doing. But I'm not wildly impressed by over-referencing. It gets very easy today with EndNote to plug everything in. But that's a personal thing. Other people like more references. So references should support the arguments being made and recognize the work done before. As I've said, there are standard formats for different journals, but hopefully with EndNote, that makes things much, much easier than it does. And a click of a button can change the referencing in a journal. I would thoroughly recommend it. EndNote Reference Manager, a little old-fashioned now. I think most people use EndNote. They are worth every penny, but hopefully journals can help you now do that sort of thing. To go on to supplementary material, we are, even in histopathology, using more supplementary files these days. And it is important, it needs to be recorded, but it is not essential. And often some of your raw data can be placed online as supplementary material to make it helpful to the authors, if to reviewers and readers, if they need it. It's very important to know who paid for the research, whether you are ethical, and whether there are any conflicts of interest that could alter the perception of what it all means. Have you been paid to do this by a pharmaceutical company? You also need to acknowledge fundings and authors and other people and authors. So always have an acknowledgement section to make it relevant. So I'd also mention here on author, there are set author guidelines these days. So on what it makes to be an author, and often there'll be a section in a paper that suggests what an author has contributed. Certainly, just filling out a survey or something is not sufficient. You need to have a bit more intellectual input to be an author. So you need to consider whether the persons would be co-authors or whether they be in the acknowledgement section. When you start to do this and write a piece of research, make sure you organize this up front. I've been involved in situations where people have been very, very cross about either their position on a paper or that they're acknowledged they're not an author. So always clear this with your group before you start up to avoid arguments afterwards, because there's nothing worse or distasteful than an argument about authors. We do accept, in some journals, they'll accept co-authors, co-first authors or co-last authors sometimes, but sometimes it goes a bit mad with 4 co-first authors and things like that. So do try and sort this out before you start your work. So in summary, I think clarity, transparency, logical sequence, and your presentation are possible. It's a lot of work, as I said, to write a good paper. The last thing is have something worth saying. If you're saying something that has been previously said by someone else, or it's not clinically important, or it doesn't lead on to further investigations of a drug or a product or something like that, it's not worth it. And sometimes, why do I reject things from histopathology? Too subspecialized, not worth saying. Too functional, is sometimes I reject things for. I personally tend to reject things for new novel prognostic factors is something I'm often not interested in if they are unlikely to go into clinical practice. But having so make sure that it's something worth saying. This is from my point as a histopathology editor. I know other editors will have their opinion. So thank you very much for listening. And I think we're going to take questions at the end.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan. It has been fantastic. So for those participants attending, please start writing your question if you have. And then I'm going to share my screen. No, I don't have to share my screen because I need to introduce the next. So Miguel has to. So while Miguel put his presentation, I would like to present him, Professor Miguel Reyes Mujica. He will provide a presentation on how to find the right journal for my paper. Those that were here last Monday know that Miguel has over 30 years of experience in the field of pediatric pathology. He trained in Mexico and worked then in Yale University School of Medicine for 14 years, where he established and directed the department, the Yale Pediatric and Developmental Pathology Program. And then between 2001 2016, he was the editor-in-chief of Pediatric and Developmental Pathology. And between 2008 and 2024, he was the chair of the Pediatric Pathology in Pittsburgh. And from this year, he is in the University of Miami. And from 2020, now he is the expert editor for the WHO classification of pediatric tumors 5th series. So thank you very much, Miguel, for presenting. And I will go, and please don't forget to write your questions. I will go on mute.
Thank you, Marta. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. This is the second time I'm with you, and I'm very honored to share this opportunity with Dan and Sarah, who will follow me. I will probably repeat a few things that Dan mentioned, but probably you will see that they are complementary. And let me see if this is advancing. Okay. So as Marta mentioned, I have some experience. That's why I'm talking to you about this. And these are going to be some of the issues. I'm not going to emphasize much about how to write a manuscript because it was already done by Dan in an excellent way. I learned from him. And I just want to emphasize what I mentioned last time for international presentations. This is also true for a paper. You have 3 basic rules. And I'm sorry. And these are to have something to say it, and to say nothing else. So you need structural elements for a paper, as it was mentioned, the evidence to support your statements, the methods, the sound theoretical background. You have to incorporate some self-criticism and address limitations of your study, conclusions, and further directions. And you have to consider all the things, what type of audience, what type of publication you are going to target, and if this is an invited or a competitive peer review paper, length, costs, etc. This has been mentioned by Dan. An important issue is the ethical platform of the paper. It's important to have permissions, images that was mentioned already, and whether it's going to be in print or online. Most of the publications now are online, and obviously to comply with deadlines. So when you are writing a case series, isolated cases or case series, it's one type of publication. You have to prepare good images, macro and microscopic images. You can also develop mechanistic papers, which are more complicated, where you have to explain what you did experimentally and justify your conclusions based on evidence. Evidence is the most important part in these types of papers. Even if it is a single case that is mechanistic, you have to explain well what the mechanisms that you are addressing are. And of course, nowadays, very complex papers with a lot of sophisticated methodology are published, and this is growing level of difficulty. Now, addressing specifically in academia, just be careful with the trends of so-called prostitution in academia. For all of you, I recommend to read this novel by Arthur Koestler, The Call Girls, where he addresses a gathering of Nobel Prize winners and candidates for Nobel Prize, and all of them show to be human, and they all have egos, and they all have limitations in their ethical approaches. So you have to keep ethics at the forefront of your work. There is another tendency, in particular in other sciences, but also in medicine, with hyper-authorship. You have to be careful. For example, this physics paper sets the record with more than 5,000 authors. So there are papers written about hyper-authorship, and you have to be careful not to feed that trend, like in this particular case. And then, rather than questioning something when you are going to present a title, and Dan mentioned this, I have sometimes used the rhetorical question like gaucher or pseudo-gaucher. But in general, the more recommended approach is to use a statement, affirm something. You have a short or sometimes a little longer line, but you say something. BRAF mutations are also associated with neurocutaneous melanocytosis. So that's an affirmation that conveys your message, and that's an important issue. And other examples, even if they are mechanistic, it's important to keep this approach. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I started using ChatGPT, and it repeated several of the things that I mentioned, like identify your audience, match the scope of your paper with the aim of the journal that you are targeting. That's an important issue. You shouldn't publish an infectious disease topic in a cancer journal, and the other way around too. So you have to look at a journal that is the appropriate, covering the appropriate topic for your work. If you want to publish, check the journal metrics and the reputation of the journal. Look at your citations and references. All these points you can find very easily using artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT. Is this an open access or a subscription-based journal? This is an important point because, as you can see, as you will see, we need to avoid using predatory papers. Review the journal's publication process. How does the editor and the editorial board of the journal works? See if you find people that you know in the editorial board. That's also a recommended strategy. You can use several of these tools to find suitable journals, Elsevier Journal Finder, Springer Journal Finder, etc. I will show you another example which we found recently very useful in a few minutes. Check the submission fee. Some journals, many journals, charge for submission. Depending on what you are submitting, if you are submitting images, the charges may increase. Sometimes these may reveal some predatory behavior, so be careful about submission fees. If they are out of line, you have to start suspecting that there is some problem with the journal. Check the last past issues and articles on the journal that you are targeting. And again, beware of predatory journals. There are several lists of predatory journals. One of the most popular ones is the Bell's list, but there are several others. So it's an important strategy. And you can always resort to artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT for these. So recently we submitted this particular paper, Hiding in Plain Sight, this is the PubMed record, and this is a PDF of the paper that was published this week. I mentioned this because when we were, this is a group of authors that includes pathologists, radiologists, and oncologists. And when we were trying to define what journal to target, we used this particular tool. There is a link here that you can use. And in this particular tool, you can insert the summary, the abstract of your manuscript, which we did. And the tool offers you find journals, find authors, or find articles on this particular topic. And when we did that, it came like this, a list of journals that are listed here. This is a little small to read, but if you look at this presentation later, you will be able to see the specific titles. And we chose the Journal of Pediatric Hematology Oncology, which appears here in this line. And we were fortunate to have acceptance very fast on this journal. So this is a good strategy to choose the journal that you are going to target. Now, how do you avoid predatory journals? Well, that's a more and more important consideration to address. You should look at the Bell's list or the Directory of Open Access Journals, which gives you a trusted database of legitimate open access journals. But there are other platforms like Think, Check, Submit here, and it will give you a number of recommendations, or it will flag the journals that you are considering. Red flags of predatory journals, the editorial and peer review process is an important thing. So if you don't recognize people in the editorial board, be suspicious. And then some unrealistic fast publication time. If they promise to publish your paper in 2 weeks, well, that is already a bad sign. Look at the editorial board, see if there are poor website designs, and unknown or fake editorial boards are always a red flag. And editorial board members without consent. Sometimes I have discovered my name in editorial boards that I have never heard of. And this happens to everybody that is working in academia more and more now. So check the metrics and indexing. If there are fake impact factors, it's important to red flag those journals. And when the journals make false claims of indexing, it's another red flag. So check journal publishing practices and verify indexing and archiving claims. All these elements are important to avoid predatory journals. Check what journals have been published in that, what papers have been published in that journal. Ask your colleagues. Your colleagues are the best reliable source to recognize predatory journals frequently, and use these tools to check credibility, as I mentioned. Important is trust your instincts. If you feel that uncomfortable with a particular journal, don't use it. So in ChatGPT, as I was preparing this talk, I found this conclusion: to avoid predatory journals, be thorough with your research and leverage the tools and strategies that were mentioned before. If you aren't sure about the journal, feel free to provide its name, and you can run it in ChatGPT, and it can help you to investigate it further. So when I ask, is International Association of Research and Science a predatory journal, the ChatGPT gave me this response. The International Association of, I cut the response, but I highlighted, has raised concerns regarding its legitimacy. So you can use more and more artificial intelligence tools for these approaches to avoid predatory journals. That's a recommended strategy. Now, as Dan mentioned, more and more there are manipulations and things that are checked. Sometimes they are legit complaints when an author manipulates images. Some other times authors take your material and publish it again under a different package. For example, in this particular paper that Dr. Cohen, Professor Cohen, recommended to me, and it's an important one, there is the description of this publishing nightmare. A researcher that found their work published again with a little bit of a different look, but the similar data and a similar graph. So this is a very close match. And this was originally published in 2021 and then published again in 2024. So people tend to do this now and claim credit for things that they haven't done. But be careful, because when you are trying to publish things and you want to make your graphs and images to look very nice, you can run the risk of manipulation. And now there are very efficient tools to detect manipulation. Even if you use an artificial intelligence tool to write your paper, if you ask ChatGPT to prepare a text or an equivalent tool to prepare a text, that can be detected easily. I generally don't use those tools to write, but there are people that use them. And if you are using it, declare it. When you submit, just mention, I use this tool, and then the editors will take that into consideration. But you have to declare the conflict that you are incurring into. Finally, pay attention to the publication's ethics. There is this platform, which is an important source for developing guidelines, guidelines for authors and reviewers, and to help identify ethical concerns, etc. If you are not familiar with this, I would invite you to explore it. It's the link is here, and it will give you a number of elements to consider when you are choosing a journal, when you are writing a paper, and when you are trying to publish academic work. Finally, remember that in the business of academia and publication, you have to be persistent. Persistence is the key. Don't fear rejection. These are examples of Nobel awardees whose papers were initially rejected. I'm sorry for the misspelling here. And as you can see, these are very well-known people that were initially rejected when they submitted their initial paper. So these are examples that you have to take into account to keep persistence in your work. Dr. Peter Medawar, who was a very important Nobel Prize winner, of course, and very important academician, mentioned that you have to consider if the scientific paper is the appropriate way to convey information. And yes, it is. But he also mentioned that the scientific paper is not exactly what we do in science. It conveys a relatively misconception of what we do. But this should not be equated with the statement of the scientific fraud. In other words, we do this because that's the way we present our information to the public, but we have to package it in a way that is understood and nicely presented. However, it's not easy to equate what an article says if you are imagining what a scientific individual does. So there are two different things. Reality in a lab or in an experimental setting is not exactly what a paper conveys. So there are some differences. I invite you to read about this interesting individual and his thinking about what papers mean. So to close, I will remind you of the 10 Commandments. One of my mentors stated, for a good scientific article to have something to say, the title must enunciate the conclusion, as I mentioned initially. The article should be signed by those responsible for the content of the article and no one else. The introduction should be used to inform the reader of the state of knowledge about the problem that you analyzed. The materials and methods must include all elements, and the results section should point to them only once and clearly. Don't repeat them, as Dan Burney mentioned. So I hope that this is complementary to what we heard from Dan Burney. I hope that you have an idea of how to go about choosing a journal that when you are trying to submit a publication. And I hope you find this presentation relatively helpful. You have our information for contacting. If there are any additional questions after the conference, I will be happy to answer those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miguel. It complements very well with Dan's presentation. and it's very helpful indeed, both of them. I am going to present, before I introduce the next speaker, Professor Sarah Copeland, let me quickly run through. I would like to present about college grants and research medals on behalf of the college. It's not moving. Okay, so I would like to provide some background on the research fellowship startup grants, which provide support to postgraduate and undergraduate students at the beginning of the research project for up to 1 year. The maximum amount is $4,000 that is awarded to a postgraduate student and up to $1,000 to undergraduate students. And these fellowships are designed to support the students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, to begin their research in pathology, to develop an academic career. The grants can support work in any discipline of medical or veterinary pathology, and are not restricted to cellular pathology or histopathology. Which is the eligibility? There will be assessed the applications against this criteria. All the postgraduate students must be medical, must be scientists, veterinary or oral pathology trainee in a Royal College specialty, which are already undertaking postgraduate research qualification under a UK institution, or they should hold an academic national training number and not hold another active research grant, and other than the funding for the postgraduate degree or small travel grants. The undergraduate students must be studying either in biomedical sciences and IBMS accredited, medical, dentistry, or veterinary in the UK, and not being received of any other financial support from those from other source for the project. The fellowship research grant is a startup grant, provides funding for up to 12 months. And this includes chemicals and or equipment, consumables, licenses for specialist software required for the project, and equipment access. It does not include travel costs, salary contribution, departmental overheads, cost of the dissemination of the work, so no, for instance, publication prices or cost. The funding also should not replace or reduce institutional or funding agency support. Research projects must be completed within 1 year of the grant being awarded. This year, 2024, has already been awarded and is currently closed. However, it will open again in 2025, and this will be advertised in the Royal College website. Then, apart from the grant, we have the college trainee research medals that are awarded annually for outstanding research work undertaken by pathologists or scientists in training. A gold research medal is awarded for the best research published, and specialty research medals are awarded for the best candidate in each of the major specialties of the college. And the aims of this research medal are to enhance the status of the research of pathology trainee, both within and outside the college, to help identify the future research stars that will provide the next generation of leadership in research, to recognize and reward the best of the excellent science that the college trainees publish, encouraging them in their research career, and to enhance the curricula of the successful individuals, to generate positive publicity and the value of the trainees gained from the college, and ultimately to increase research activity within pathology. The applications are assessed on potential benefit to the public and patients, the impact on the field, and the contribution of the individual on the paper. So who can apply? And again, it's open to all trainees, scientists, oral pathologists, or veterinary pathologists that are employed in a suitable specialty, training or appropriate research academic post during the year the submitted paper was published. and research paper must have been either published or accepted for publication by a peer-reviewed journal. And applications, again, are currently closed for this year, but they will reopen next year in 2025. And you can visit our webpage of the college to find out when it is open. And now I will stop sharing this presentation, and I can introduce the next speaker. So it's Professor Sarah Copeland, who is a senior consultant histopathologist at the Liverpool University Foundation Hospital Trust in the UK, with expertise in ophthalmic pathology, hematopathology, molecular and digital pathology, and biobanking. She is the current registrar of the College of the Royal College of Pathologists, and is the current president of the Pathological Societies of Great Britain and Ireland. She has won several awards for research and teaching, including the International Council of Ophthalmology's Eye Pathology Award and the 2019 Royal College Excellence Award. And she was included in the Pathologist Power List of 2019, 2021, and 2023, and was also listed in the top 100 influential women in ophthalmology in 2021 and 2024. Thank you, Sarah, for enlightening us, presenting on how to write grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for that very kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this seminar. So I think my talk repeats some of the take-home messages that have already been spelled out by Dan and Miguel, but it's addressing essentially how the ins and outs of writing grants. So let me just move forward. So yes, guides for writing research grants. You could actually, put this in Google and, put in the words 10 simple rules for getting and writing grants, and you'd come up with a number of different recipes, and there are ones that which are worth following, and perhaps others which aren't as up to date. So I will probably be giving you my penny's worth today, and I hope that you'd find it of value. A bit like Miguel, you can also use ChatGPT, and it comes up with a guideline for you. And I think these 10 points are reasonable, and some of them I will be addressing in the following slides. But I think the thing is, when you're writing a paper, or you're choosing the journal that you want to submit your paper to, or when you're choosing grants, don't be distracted by the success rates. Of course, nowadays it is extremely competitive to get grants, and you may be put off by the rates of there's only a 1 in 10 chance of getting this, or a 1 in 5 chance of getting that. The thing is that you've got to believe in yourself, a bit like Barack Obama, in his political campaign. You've got to believe in yourself, and that writing grants there, it is possible to obtain them. You've just got to be stubborn and dogmatic and follow the rules, and also be patient. So my rule, and Dan started his talk speaking about novels. I'm talking about the newness, inverted commas, of work. So, but when you're writing your grant, you really have to enjoy writing it, and you have to be able to convey your enthusiasm for your topic and why that it needs to be funded. So it really should be a pleasure in writing this grant. If you start writing a grant as if it was a chore, been pushed and hounded to write a grant, then that's going to be conveyed through the text. So you really have to demonstrate as much as you can the absolute willingness and how much you really want to get these monies, so that you can undertake this area of research, and why it is so important. So use the opportunity of writing a grant to have an impact, you having an impact in your particular field of research. and yes, feel passionate about what you're writing. What is important is that, you're making sure that you distinguish yourself from others. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't be jumping on another bandwagon and trying out a different antibody using your favorite tumor and, comparing the results of that new antibody with what's already out there. It has to be something different and which will be, contribute to the knowledge in that field and bring it, even if it's only a millimeter forward in our understanding of science. But on the other hand, it can't be too blue sky. It can't be really, too far out there that, people just think it would be impossible, to achieve within the time frame or with the budgeted monies. So whenever you're thinking about a project, and you also have to think about how various research projects may be interlinked, and you don't want them all to fail because perhaps in work package 1 you didn't get the results that you were hoping to get. So you have to always have contingency plans that, if project A doesn't work, and you were hoping that project A would lead on to project B, but it doesn't, you've got a project C as a backup plan. So when you're writing the grant, look at make sure you know the field that you want to apply to monies to, you know it very well, and that you have to convince the reviewers that you know all about it and that you're the best person in the best place to move things forward. And so more often than not, to demonstrate this, to convince the reviewers, it is usual that you have some preliminary data, so that they can see that you know how to do this particular technique or techniques, and that you have a team with experience, and so that that you're essentially ready to go as soon as that money lands in your bank account. And so it's good to have some preliminary data. Also, when you're doing a review of the literature in that particular area, make sure you cite all the relevant papers. You don't overlook some big people in the field because they are more than likely to be a reviewer. And yes, as I've already said, make sure that you and your partners, your team, however large it is, you're in the environment with the techniques and you can do this work, and that you know that you can do it within the scientific budget. And yes, always, where possible, emphasize your track record, even if it is in the CV at the end of the grant. And if you've got a well-developed CV, but you're focusing on a particular, let's say, tumor, let's say renal tumors, then demonstrate your track record in the renal tumors. Don't necessarily demonstrate them in other areas as well, okay, unless it's appropriate. So when you're applying for a grant, it's a bit like submitting a paper to a journal. You choose the right type of grant. You look at it. You look at the call. Why are they putting out a particular call, and what questions are they wanting to be addressed? And check that your project fits into the programmatic fit. And also, more often than not, the funders have websites with information regarding contact people who you can check. You can just do a double check with these people and say, you can email them, and more often than not, they do reply, and they suggest that you provide a little summary of the project that you're thinking about. Could be 100 or 200 words, or even you can have a virtual call with them. Just double check with them that what you're thinking about is actually within the remit what they're thinking about. And so these grant administrators or the assistant staff are the ones for you to get to know best, and just really probe them if you're on the right track and this is the right grant for you. And also, what is I highly recommend is that if they were to have available either on the website or they can share with you previous grants that have been successful. And even within your own institution, ask if you're going for example, the Medical Research Council grant, then you ask around, has there been somebody in your institute who's been successful recently, and could you read their grant just to get some tips? And tips and tricks also in terms of the formulation of words, and both Dan and Miguel spoke about that, using words, and there are particular buzzwords which are sometimes really appropriate for that time when writing your grant application. Follow the guidelines. A bit like when you're submitting an article, just make sure you follow the instructions to the authors. I mean, there is no point submitting something where it is absolutely clear from the very beginning that the person hasn't read the instructions. So, funding bodies will triage out grants right at the very beginning. They won't even send them out to reviewers if you haven't followed the instructions. So, this also includes not only the main grant project, usually in electronic form in the meantime, but also the support material, such as the budget justification, the CVs, the support letters, etc. You have to get it right. You have to read the instructions. And if you don't, if it doesn't aggravate the staff at the very beginning who are doing the triaging, then it's certainly going to aggravate the reviewers later, and they will start reading your grant with in a bad mood, to be honest, and that will influence your ability to be successful. So double check the length and the format of the grants. Double check the font, the size, also whether the text has to be customized to the left or whether it's block customized. All of this is important, and double check also the number of pages. And make sure that when you're looking at the application instruction, is it word counts, character counts, and also in terms of pages, is there a limit in terms of the page counts? And even if there are 150 words that you need to provide for a lay summary, and you provide 145 words, it doesn't matter. You don't have to go up to 150 words if you've conveyed the message appropriately. So really obey the 3 C's. It should be concise, clear, and complete. So the goals, what you want to achieve, how you want to achieve them. Use catchy titles if you want. They're always good. Acronyms, for a particular study can be of value. Specify what you want to achieve up front. Yes, and of course, as I said, don't be too blue sky, don't be too ambitious. They are usually poorly rated. And I think Dan also mentioned the images. They have to be good quality, particularly if they're histopathology. And also, even with Western blots and things like that, they have to be good quality. If when it comes to data, make sure that the data that is provided, perhaps as preliminary data, isn't too massive. And also double check, some people think that, by providing a hyperlink in the text that it will work and save you some room with regard to the word count, but it may not actually work on the electronic website or application form. So these little things you really have to check. And you also have to remember the reviewers are people too. They are typically doing this out of their day work as extracurricular activities. They are usually reviewing a large number of grants simultaneously, and they usually have a short time period. And so you have to get the message across really simply and clearly. And the messages that you want to convey to them can't be buried in masses and masses of text. So it's really important to get it, so to say, in their face, so they understand it right from the get-go, what you're all about. And also be aware that, not all of the reviewers even the whole reviewer panel, they may not be in your area of expertise. And so they will be taking a slightly different angle. So therefore, it's a bit like journalism. You have to sell your work in compact sound bites. And you can use a bit of, to make it a bit interesting, you can use some, a bit of some historical perspectives, possibly even a bit of even humor. And, perhaps don't necessarily use the examples that I'm applying here in these slides, but you can always use underlining, bolding, or different colors even to restate your key points that you want to get across. And just also remember that more often than not, before you actually submit your grant, that you have to take, particularly if you're writing a grant with a group of people, that you have the deadline maybe say the end of March, but you bring it forward a month at least for the sake of internal review within your institution. I know within the UK there is almost a demand that all big programmatic grants are read internally before they go out to or externally for review. And it's more often not that your colleagues in your institution are more critical than those who are external. And if you had a grant application torn apart, with good intentions by your colleagues at home, that by the time you submit your final application, that it really should be rock solid and shouldn't have many gaps. So this internal review process I can highly recommend. And if the grant does involve interviews, then also if you get into say a second round of grant, the grant review process, which does involve interviews, then again use what is available to you at home, and get people to grill you, to have a mock interview. And it is of great value to have such a mock interview, because they do pose questions that perhaps you and your co-authors hadn't thought about. And then I think also what reviewers and particularly the funders are always thinking beyond the grant. Okay, yes, they provide you, for example, with, I don't know, £500,000, and yes, you're successful with obtaining that money and conducting your research, but actually, where does it go? Where will it lead to? So you want to outline quite clearly what is beyond that grant, and what you're planning to achieve. And so you have to outline the ongoing benefits, so that the particularly the grant funding organization know that their money is well invested, and that you're hoping at some stage in either it's a short, medium, or long term, that there will be an impact, either with the public or with patient care, but that ultimately that is the goal. And you may not be able to demonstrate that obviously within 3 years if it's a grant for 3 years, but your aim would be after, say, 5 years you may obtain this, and 10 years you may obtain that. So just try and make it clear that there is an end goal to your research, and that their money will be well invested. Now, yes, people do get rejected, and it's happened to all of us at some stage, and often, whatever phase you are in your career, it doesn't always happen to early career researchers. It certainly happens to senior researchers as well. So it is inevitable, and there are certain stages that which you go through, believe me. And I think even as a mature senior researcher, I'm pretty sure I still go through all these phases as well. But perhaps the period in between have become shorter over the time. But it does happen, and I guess it's a process that we all learn from. So we accept it, we learn from it. We shouldn't be discouraged. We should continue on our path, particularly if we really believe in the work that we want to achieve. Yes, and all of these things. Be diplomatic with the funding agency. You don't want a black mark put against your name. Avoid abusive emails, because they will, the admin staff will never help you again with writing, giving advice regarding writing grants. And, really consider, how could you repurpose that grant? Take on board the criticisms of the reviewers, but how could you repurpose it in a slightly different way if there were to be a similar call coming out in, say, 6 months? But you have to accept this as a bit of a game. It's something that we play and we learn from, but hopefully at one stage we are successful, and once we are successful, then that success breeds further success. Something that I'd also strongly advise, particularly my early career researchers, is that they become a grant reviewer, so that they learn how grants are reviewed. They sit on panels, they hear constructive criticisms from other grant reviewers, and they learn from the experience. And this in turn helps you write a better grant. And this can be, why grants are triaged out before the complete review, how the panel reacts to grants in general, and what are the various roles of the program officers organizing the grants, and what is actually the oversight, the role of the Oversight Council in determining the distribution of the monies. So you learn about the whole process. I'm representing here the Pathological Society, and a bit like Marta, she outlined a number of grants which are available at the Royal College of Pathologists. The Pathological Society, or PathSoc for short, its main remit is to support academic pathologists and academic basic researchers who are interested in pathology, diagnostic pathology, and fundamental research. And so it has a whole range of different grants which are listed in the website, and they are addressed and targeted at different stages of everybody's career. I just want to say that, PathSoc perhaps doesn't have international grants, but there are a range of different organizations which do provide international funding. But just to say that when it comes to international research grant writing, it increases the complexity level a bit further, in that it usually takes longer. You usually have more than just, for example, 2 centers being involved in the work. I was involved in a Horizon 2020 project, a program grant, which was for 5 years, and that involved 12 centers. So there are a number of different administrative parties that you have to be dealing with. Obviously, diplomacy is definitely required in sorting out, where people are in terms of who's the principal investigator, who are co-investigators, who are collaborators. That all has to be dealt with upfront. More often not, if it's a large project grant such as the Horizon 2020, then it usually needs a project manager to coordinate things. And they are definitely very useful in terms of currency, so the provision and the division of the finances between the various countries. And certainly if they are long-term grants, then you have to have regular meetings, and they could be 6 monthly, but probably more frequently. And they can obviously be virtual, but at least once a year, face-to-face. But once you obtain this volume of money, and it's clear what work packages are being done where and how they interlink with each other, the outputs of such a program grant are just fantastic, and they're well worth the effort. So even though there may be a bit of frustration during the whole process, it's really worth the effort. I just want to highlight a couple of international research grant funding bodies, such as the UK Research Institute, which has on its website, it has a number of grants funding organizations such as the Global Research Council, Science Europe, etc., all listed here. They obviously have a base in the UK, but they have other bases worldwide. Big organizations like this often go through a review of their strategic objectives, and on their website they have listed their 6 strategic objectives for international research, and it'd be worth looking at those different ones, and they really go into quite detail about those. And I just want to say, I mean, I've been at the University of Liverpool now for 19 years, and I've been able to I have my own research group. It's the Liverpool Ocular Oncology Research Group, and I have a unique bioresource, and this has enabled me to collaborate nationally and internationally, including on big projects such as the Cancer Genome Atlas, and as I mentioned, the Horizon 2020 grant, and elsewhere. But you know, it is a fantastic experience, and I just highly recommend being persistent with it, even though that sometimes everything can appear quite daunting. So my take-home points, very similar to Dan's, Miguel's, and Marta's, is that you know, always just keep your eye out for differing funding opportunities. Think outside the box. Think outside pathology. More often than not, there are multidisciplinary grants, you know, involving physics, maths, biochemistry. You know, really think outside the box. It doesn't have to be you know, specific only to pathology. Good time management is key, and yeah, calculate it in time for multiple revisions, and you know, if need be, also interviews. Really don't fear the red pen of your colleagues. I have been at the receiving end of lots of corrections from my colleagues, and you just, you know, you take on board those ones that you think are appropriate, and you know, not necessarily are all correct, but more often not, they do lead to an improvement of either your article that you're submitting to a journal or to your grant. And I really would look out for guidance and mentorship within your own institution, or even outside your institution if there's nobody available. And as I said at the beginning, you know, if you don't succeed at the first time, just keep on trying, because it could well be that you have to write 5 grants to get 1. And but you know, once you've got that first one, then it's, you know, it's the stepping stone for further success. And so you've just got to keep on believing in yourself and yourselves as a team. So with that, I'll finish off, and I've got my email address at the bottom there, and I'm happy to take questions either now via the chat or via email. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's been fantastic. Really, you know, wide-opening, because some of the websites, etc., that you share, I didn't know them, so it's very good. While I take some for questions, I want to say there are already some questions, so if you want to drop some more, this is the last webinar of this series, and remember that the recordings will be stored on the college website, and this is within 2 weeks or 2 weeks after today. And that you have to look within the International Virtual Resources webpage and the Research and Innovation, and there will be a section titled Key Skills to Enhance Academic Career, and then this is where you can download your part 1 and part 2 webinars. We will also be sending some brief survey, so please complete the feedback so we can improve and have some of your ideas of what went well, what could have been improved. So while I open the questions, I will start with the last one for Dan, because it's something that I had in mind asking you. My actual question, I'm going to assemble the question that I have, is how to check if some or part of the paper has been written using AI. And then Akinyemi says, what are the acceptable roles of AI in manuscript writing?
Thank you. These are difficult questions which are ongoing. I will say that as far as I'm concerned, as far as pathology is concerned, this is an ongoing question. In that we are going to be moving to a website that does more AI checking. At the moment, we don't have that much. I must say that if you look through X or Twitter, for instance, you can tell pretty quickly when AI is involved if you get your head around it. The AI generated stuff is pretty obvious at the moment still to my sight anyway. So I don't think there's that much going on. What is acceptable? I think that's an ongoing question. I think we're still discovering the rules about this. I don't know whether Miguel or Sarah have any insight into this, but I'm not seeing that much at the moment, but it's certainly an ongoing and very fast-moving situation, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. So next question, I think, is also for you, Dan. If at first you don't succeed with one journal for a paper that is within this scope, it's worth trying another. What advice would you give to this situation?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm not the first author who has been rejected a couple of times before I go down. And often I'll start high and maybe lucky. If I'm not, I'll go to a lower impact factor journal. I have a lot of stuff that I must confess I have not published that I probably ought to have done. But it's sort of, sometimes it waits for the right moment to republish. So this is part of any academic's career. You will get rejection. I will say some publishers have systems. So certainly Wiley, the publisher of Histopathology, when we get rejected if you get rejected from Histopathology, you often get a letter back saying, why don't you try one of our other Wiley journals these days and try to do an AI fit for it? So we're using AI for that sort of stuff. So you may get an invitation to submit somewhere else, your paper somewhere else. It may not be right for you, but it might be right for you. So there's a whole team of systems. Nearly, please don't give up is my opinion. If you have, you'll probably get it in somewhere if it's saying something.
Yeah, and the only thing I fully agree with you. I've been rejected many times, but what I would advise is also to introduce the changes subjected by the reviewers.
Absolutely.
Yes,
if they have any. I mean, often papers get rejected because it's not the right fit or something straight away without full review. So please accept that. We can't absolutely review everything that comes into the journal.
Yeah.
One thing my journal and a lot of journals do is that if it's not the right fit for you, we'll give you a 1 day, 2 day saying this isn't the right fit for us and explain why with a detailed review. That gives you time to submit elsewhere. Better that than staying with us for 8 weeks and nothing happening.
That's absolutely. So I think this question is either for Dan or for Miguel. How much is considered a high publication fee?
Dan, you want to answer that or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to go for journals that require a publication fee, to be honest with you. I go for journals that don't. There's all sorts of, so if you live in certain countries and it's widening, you have open access in many journals. Many European countries and some American states are entirely open access. If you need open access for histopathology, for instance, I'm sure the same is true for Journal of Pathology. I don't tend to submit. Most are about $2,000-3,000, I think, these days. If it goes higher than that, then it's a no-no. It depends what your grant fees are. Yeah. I will just say, personal anecdote, one of the few times I've had my fingers burnt actually as an academic is I submitted something to Oncotarget and they have a fee. And Oncotarget was later proved to be a rather dodgy journal. and it was taken off PubMed. So the one time I have gone for publication fees, this was about 5-6 years ago, I had my fingers burnt. So there you go.
To be honest, I have recently published a paper and it was given open access by the journal. I didn't pay for anything. What some journals are doing is this was about cardiac deaths. So they went to a British Heart Foundation and they said, this paper is about cardiac death in children in the UK, in England, would you fund? And I think this is how they got it. So be aware that if the paper is interesting, there may be institutions, like my experience with the British Heart Foundation, that they will pay the open access.
Yeah. And some, as I said, some countries have deals with certain publishers to have open access. And it's worth making sure that if you have a multinational authorship, that the corresponding author is from the appropriate country. It's one of those little tricks that you need to learn.
The other question I think is for Dan, but I'm sure which is your answer. How fast can a good paper be written?
Gosh.
Exactly.
Gosh, how long is a piece of string? I think it's another alternative argument. So I'm going to again from I'm going to give you two examples. One example is from about 12 years ago, Christmas Eve. My partner had an emergency with one of his relations and had to depart very, very quickly up to Glasgow. And I had an evening to myself. I wrote a small opinion piece in that evening and had it published within a few days. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I've had some papers that have taken me years and years.
Yeah.
That was a small publication paper. So I that is impossible to answer that question. It is really, how long does a novel take? A novel can take from 20 years to some people write novels in days.
So thank you. I have a question from Miguel and one question for Sarah. So Miguel, it's very, very useful, your webpage about Jane, because I think it's very, very, I didn't know about that. It's incredibly helpful. I was surprised because my view on the predatory journals, and I think one of them is possibly MDPI, is that to me it's a business. They set up 400 different journals of physics, maths, environment, anything, and then I was a bit concerned that at some international meetings that I'm not going to name them, there was a stand of the MDPI, and I wondered if we should make the organizations aware that they should not be considered industry, because as when I look for a journal where to send a paper, I look for journals that belong to a society, that are joined to a society, because that gives the journal credibility. But these journals that are open access, so what do you think? Do you think we should try to, fight back? Because otherwise the good journals that belong to societies are not going to survive, because these other are an industry which are now even advertising on international meetings.
Yeah, that's worry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very worrying, and it's a growing business, and it's going to be very difficult to fight it. But I think that we, academicians that are part of professional societies and consider ourselves ethically right, should fight. I think that is our obligation to fight this and report this. I would stress the use of the COPE, the Ethics in Publication Committee, which is a very useful, I used it for several years, very useful platform, and you can ask them questions and they can give you advice. Of course, all these groups are human groups, and they all have different levels of effectiveness. But yes, I agree with you, Marta. In general, when there is a predatory journal, it's very obvious when you have a little bit of experience, and they charge tremendous fees for nothing, For submission, they can charge you $1,000. A submission fee of 50 or $100 is all right. But there are high-tier journals that can charge you a lot, and they are very serious journals. Now, there are very high-tier journals that also are ethically questionable to some extent. So it's a very difficult thing, but I think that a common effort to keep the record straight is important, and we should be proactive in reporting them.
Yeah, and I think that also this should go hand in hand with the journals developing tools of AI to identify AI-produced papers, because of these paper mills that these journals get authors to pay for a paper, and they even write the paper. So it's a paper mill business that is something new. And I know that AI is more and more being used. So really, the journal should be, getting ahead of identifying. So the last question is for Sarah, and I say last question because I know we are running a bit out of time. But the question is there any grant scheme to support consultant histopathologists working in NHS hospital if they want to conduct some research?
Yes, there it's definitely the case that there are grants available for UK-based consultant pathologists, and their associated teams, and they are both available via the Pathological Society and also the college. But probably they're more, to be honest, they're probably more available via the Pathological Society, and you can.
I'd add there's a few grants from the BDIAP as well that we do.
Sorry. Yep.
Sorry.
Sorry.
As well, just to add my bit. So you've got a number of sources.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to say that I know colleagues here who have 100% started off with their job plan as being 100% NHS diagnostic pathologists, okay, but then they applied to grants and they were able to buy out some of their time. So, for example, 1 day a week where it'd be dedicated and ring fenced to research, and I guess it all depends on the degree of how engaged the person would like to be in terms of academic pathology, but they could step by step increase the amount of time within their working week to be able to undertake academic research. And so such grant schemes do enable pathologists to undertake research, and more often than not it tends to be more translational research.
To add that, because it's about NHS pathologists in general, each trust, each hospital, they usually have a research directorate. So them ask the questions, and they are very helpful to guide you to where to apply, to help you to apply, to get you obviously help with the ethical approval, etc.
Yeah.
But any other question, please email Sarah, or if not, the international team, and we will post the question to the speakers. And I think with this, we are concluding. And I just want to say thank you very, very much to today's presenters, to Professor Berni, Miguel Reyes Mujica, and Professor Sarah Copeland for providing so much useful insight. Thank you for being friends and colleagues to me. It's a pleasure. And to all participants that attended this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye then.
Bye.